Welcome back to Vietnamese Case Files. In today's compilation video, we will take a deep dive into 6 shocking cases, exposing haunting, hidden corners, greed, and ruthless tragedies from the past to the present. We begin with a case in Houston in 2014, where Luan Hoang Vu coldly took the life of his ex-girlfriend and then staged a fake kidnapping for ransom scheme simply to test the capabilities of American police. Next is the highly controversial story of Melissa Tran, a mother of 4 who was deported from the United States after more than 3 decades of living there due to a mistake from 20 years earlier. We will also be horrified by the case of Stephen Than Nguyen, a man who lived and slept beside a corpse hidden inside a suitcase for months at a homeless encampment in Seattle. This video will also take you back in time to learn about Charles Sobhraj, the infamous Vietnamese-blooded serial killer known as the Serpent, who terrorized travelers across Southeast Asia in the 1970s. Alongside that is a heartbreaking tragedy in San Jose, where Duong Lu, driven by inheritance greed, conspired with his close friend to brutally murder his own parents. Finally, there is the brutal shooting in the parking lot of a Walmart in Texas, which took the life of Doan Van Duong, a gentleman who had only recently immigrated to the United States to reunite with his family. Each case is not only a sequence of crimes, but also a costly lesson about human nature and the law. Now, let's turn the pages of each detailed case file together. And if you enjoy investigative true crime content and want to follow along with Vietnamese case files in upcoming cases, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Now, let's begin. Melissa Chun is the name used in the United States by Chun Thị Mong Tuyen. Born in 1982 in Vietnam, Melissa immigrated to the United States with her family in 1993 when she was just 11 years old. Like many Vietnamese immigrants, the family started over from nothing. Melissa quickly adapted to her new life and later became a lawful permanent resident, holding a valid green card. Melissa's teenage years passed quietly in what many considered the promised land. As an adult, she built what seemed like an ideal life. She married Danny Duong Hoang, a Vietnamese-American citizen, and together they opened a small nail salon in Hagerstown to make a living. The couple had 4 children and lived peacefully in a modest suburban home. Melissa was well loved by friends and customers alike. She was known as a devoted mother, a hardworking business owner, always kind to her clients and deeply committed to her community. She even cared for an elderly, isolated neighbor, reflecting her compassionate nature. At first glance, Melissa Tran's life appeared no different from that of millions of diligent immigrants across the United States. She was a model wife and mother, working tirelessly every day to support her family and paying her taxes in full. Yet behind that calm exterior lay a hidden shadow, one youthful mistake that quietly followed her for decades, unseen by most of those around her. Melissa once believed she had left her past behind, but fate does not let go so easily. That dark chapter, once reopened, turned this gentle middle-aged woman into the central figure of a shocking deportation case. It all began in a summer more than 20 years ago. In 2001, when Melissa was 19, she worked at a local store in the state of Virginia. Naive and under the influence of a troubled ex-boyfriend, the young woman became entangled in a theft and financial fraud scheme. Specifically, Melissa was accused of stealing checks and cash from her own workplace and of taking part in writing forged checks to withdraw money illegally. The wrongdoing was quickly discovered, and Melissa was arrested for investigation. Faced with clear evidence, Melissa Tran immediately pleaded guilty to the fraud, forgery, and theft charges brought by prosecutors. According to Melissa's later account, her decision to plead guilty was partly driven by a desire to protect her then-boyfriend, the person believed to be the true mastermind who had persuaded and pressured her into joining the theft. Even so, the law did not accept that justification. In any case, Melissa agreed to repay the full amount she had taken and serve the penalty imposed by the authorities as punishment for her first major mistake. In other words, she accepted the consequences, hoping that after release she could rebuild her life. At that time, the US criminal justice system's response was relatively lenient. The judge sentenced her to only 6 months in jail for theft and financial forgery since the losses were not considered substantial. This could be seen as a chance for someone as young as Melissa to turn her life around. After completing her sentence, Melissa left prison in 2002, innocently believing she had paid her debt to society. However, the story did not end there. Quietly but inevitably, another legal machine began to move, pulling Melissa into a new spiral that was even more serious: the machinery of US immigration law. What Melissa did not realize was that the moment she pleaded guilty to theft in 2001, she had unknowingly opened the door to her own deportation from the United States. For any US citizen, serving a sentence after a conviction usually means the matter is over and life goes on. But Melissa Tran was only a lawful permanent resident, not a US citizen. And in the eyes of immigration authorities, the offense she was convicted of fell into the category of a crime involving moral turpitude, conduct viewed as violating society's moral and ethical standards. For permanent residents convicted of this type of offense, US law allows them to be removed to their country of origin after they complete their criminal sentence. In other words, Melissa's 6-month jail term was only the beginning. Deportation was the consequence that would hang over her for many years afterward, but Melissa had no idea this was coming. It was not until an immigration court hearing around 2003 to 2004 that Melissa was stunned to learn that, legally, she had already been placed on the list of individuals who could be deported from the United States immediately after walking out of prison. In other words, the immigration court formally ruled that Melissa Tran had to leave the United States. Procedurally, after this ruling, Melissa was no longer considered a lawful permanent resident in the United States. Her green card was effectively revoked, and she should have arranged to leave the US and return to Vietnam as ordered by the court. Yet a legal paradox emerged. Melissa Tran remained in the United States, and in fact stayed for more than 20 additional years. Why did that happen? The answer lay in an enforcement gap, the US. Immigration authorities could not close at the time. Vietnam refused to accept citizens who had left the country before 1995. Melissa had come to the US in 1993, before that 1995 cutoff, so the Vietnamese side would not issue documents to receive her back. Meanwhile, to deport someone, US immigration authorities must obtain a travel document issued by the person's country of origin. If that country does not issue one, the US cannot force the issue or unilaterally put the person on a plane. As a result, the US government essentially froze the deportation order, meaning it could not be carried out, but it was not canceled either. Legally, Melissa Tran fell under an order of supervision, a status for people with a final removal order that cannot yet be executed. Under this arrangement, starting around 2004, she had to comply with strict requirements, such as regularly checking in with immigration authorities, reporting any change of address, and being ready to respond to any request from officials. With no intention of resisting, for more than 20 years, Melissa consistently reported as scheduled, never fled, and never committed any further violations. During that same period, Melissa opened a nail salon, raised her children, and lived an honest life like many ordinary people. Many around her did not even know she had a criminal past. As more than 2 decades passed, everything seemed so settled that even Melissa gradually believed the old deportation order had faded into history. In reality, her deportation order never disappeared. It simply lay dormant, waiting to be reactivated. Then, the shock arrived in 2025, when changes on both the US and Vietnamese sides caused Melissa's legal time bomb to suddenly detonate. In early 2025, under a new term, the US administration pursued a tougher approach toward immigration. They pushed Vietnam to take back even those who had resettled in the US before 1995 if they had violated the law. Facing that pressure, in February 2025, the Vietnamese government made concessions, agreeing to issue travel documents for dozens of Vietnamese nationals with long-standing deportation orders and committing to expedite new deportation requests from the USS. That meant the biggest barrier that had kept Melissa from being deported for over 20 years had now been removed. Like a domino effect, the legal process surrounding Melissa Tran began moving quickly. In the eyes of immigration authorities, there was no longer any reason to delay Melissa's deportation. The Vietnamese nail salon owner likely still had no idea that unseen forces were building beneath the surface. She continued her daily life and kept complying with her routine check-ins, just as she had for years. But her next check-in would no longer be as peaceful as before. On May 12, 2025, Melissa Tran went to the ICE office in Baltimore, Maryland for her routine check-in as usual, and was unexpectedly taken into custody on the spot. Without any warning, she was handcuffed and escorted away. From a free woman, Melissa instantly became an immigration detainee held for an indefinite period. ICE quickly transferred her through multiple detention facilities across the United States, first to a detention center in Louisiana, then Arizona, and finally the Northwest ICE Processing Center in Tacoma, Washington. This geographic scattering made it extremely difficult for her family in Maryland to visit her. In total, Melissa was held for about 5 months within the federal immigration detention system. During her detention, Melissa Tran endured extremely harsh living conditions. She said there were times she was kept for 5 straight days without a shower, without a toothbrush, or basic hygiene supplies. The food was poor quality, and at times, she claimed it even contained insects and maggots. These accounts were not just rumors. Melissa herself described them in interviews with US media after she was temporarily released. The fact that a middle-aged woman with no history of violence could be detained under such conditions sparked widespread outrage. Her family and the local community in Hagerstown organized advocacy efforts and small demonstrations calling for Melissa's release. A campaign named Bring Melissa Home gathered hundreds of signatures through petitions, and about 200 local residents even held a public meeting to pressure ICE to free her. Amid the public backlash, Melissa Tran's case was brought before the immigration court in Baltimore for review. Over the 5 months she was detained, she appeared in immigration court twice, as her attorneys petitioned for her release on bond while she awaited removal proceedings. Melissa's legal argument relied on established precedent. Because Vietnam had not yet issued a travel document, holding her indefinitely was unnecessary and unlawful, and case law provides that the government may not detain someone beyond 6 months if removal cannot be carried out. Ultimately, at a hearing in early October 2025, a federal judge agreed that the government was detaining Melissa unnecessarily without repatriation documents. He ruled that ICE must release Melissa Tran while deportation procedures were still pending. As a result, on October 13, 2025, Melissa was released from the ICE facility in Tacoma at 5 o'clock in the morning and boarded a flight back to Maryland to reunite with her husband and children. It was an overwhelming moment of joy for her family. After 5 long months in detention, Melissa could finally return home and hold her children again. However, this freedom was only temporary. The removal order issued more than 20 years earlier had never been canceled or pardoned, and Melissa was released on the condition that she continued to check in with ICE regularly and remain ready to comply with deportation whenever ordered. From that point on, Melissa's family and attorneys entered a race against time to find a legal solution to prevent her from being permanently deported. On one hand, they contacted politicians and sought support from the community. On the other hand, her legal team considered pursuing a pardon for her old theft conviction in Virginia because if the underlying conviction were pardoned, the legal basis for deportation could be eliminated. But this path was difficult and time-consuming, while ICE could act at any moment. And indeed, ICE did not leave Melissa in peace for long. Just 1 week after returning home, on October 20th, 2025, Melissa reported to ICE for the first time since her release. During that appointment, ICE officers placed an electronic ankle monitor on her to track her movements, treating her like a dangerous offender on release. Melissa's attorney immediately objected, arguing that the measure violated legal regulations, and ICE was later forced to remove the monitor. Even so, the atmosphere remained extremely tense, an ominous sign of what was coming. The situation escalated during her next check-in on November 12, 2025. That day, the case officer was absent, but another ICE official interviewed Melissa with a cold, intimidating demeanor. He directly questioned her about speaking to the media regarding poor detention conditions, saying she had not been able to shower, had been mistreated, and had been forced to eat food containing maggots and insects. The unexpected interrogation made Melissa realize that what she had shared with the press had reached ICE. Despite her fear, she remained calm and replied that she had only told the truth while trying to avoid a direct confrontation. But it was clear that ICE had taken note of the fact that she dared to speak out. 2 days later, on November 14, 2025, Melissa Tran returned for her next scheduled check-in, and this time, she did not get to go home. As soon as she arrived, ICE detained her again. An officer briefly informed her that Vietnam had issued her travel documents and that she would be deported within the next few days. During this short window, Melissa's attorneys fought until the very last minute. They argued that for the past 20 years, she had rehabilitated, built a stable family, contributed to US society, and posed no danger to the community. Melissa's family and several local politicians also spoke out, saying that deporting a mother of 4 at this point was cruel and unnecessary. On the other side, immigration authorities and supporters of a hardline approach insisted that the law is the law. From this viewpoint, Melissa Tran had committed a serious offense, had been under a valid removal order suspended for more than 20 years, and had already received full due process. Therefore, removing her from the United States was simply the enforcement of a lawful court decision. In the end, the government's position carried the decisive weight. All rescue efforts by her family and attorneys could not stop ICE from moving forward with deportation at breakneck speed after November 14, 2025. There were no further hearings. The removal order issued in 2004 officially moved out of suspended status and became a harsh reality. In the early hours of November 17, 2025, Melissa Tran was escorted onto an ICE charter flight departing from Louisiana, beginning a journey lasting dozens of hours with multiple international stopovers before arriving in Hanoi, Vietnam. Throughout the flight, she was handcuffed and shackled tightly to her seat like a dangerous prisoner, completely deprived of the freedom to move. Despite being a woman in her 40s, Melissa was not unshackled for nearly 2 days and nights, even while eating or using the restroom. She later described the flight as utterly agonizing. Human rights attorneys who learned of the incident compared it to something medieval in the 21st century, arguing that it violated human rights and ran contrary to the USS Constitution and international standards. When the plane landed at Noi Bai International Airport, Melissa Tran stepped off, looking gaunt, exhausted both physically and mentally. After more than 30 years away, she was suddenly back, nearly a stranger in the very land where she was born. With no immediate family waiting at the airport, Melissa quietly followed authorities to complete the required procedures. Fortunately, a distant cousin, someone she had only previously contacted by phone, agreed to let her stay temporarily. Walking out of the airport, the 43-year-old stood dazed, breathing the air of Vietnam, her homeland, which she had left at only 11 years old. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, a family was left without a mother and wife. Danny Hoang and their 4 children in Maryland endured the hardest days of their lives. The 4 kids, the oldest only just entering adolescence and the youngest still in elementary school, were forced to adjust to life without the familiar care and presence they had always known. Danny, grieving his wife's absence, also had to shoulder both the father's and mother's roles alone to raise their children. Of course, the family knew Melissa had arrived safely in Vietnam, but the prospect of reunion was completely uncertain. A family friend choked back tears, saying it was cruel that the government had taken Melissa away from her husband and children like this. The kids had already suffered too much, and now they would have to keep growing up in separation. For her part, in her first days back in Vietnam, Melissa fell into silence. In her first letter to loved ones, written 1 week after being deported, she said she was devastated and heartbroken to leave the country she had called home for 32 years. She admitted she was struggling to readjust to life in Vietnam, where everything felt unfamiliar. Melissa also said she felt profoundly lonely and that every passing moment ached with longing for her husband and children. But one rare consolation, she wrote, was that she no longer had to live under constant fear every time she reported for check-ins. For years, the dread of not knowing when she might be detained haunted her more than a death sentence. Now that fear was gone, but in its place was a painful void from losing everything she loved most. Melissa wrote that she did not know what the future would hold, but she was placing her trust in her faith to steady herself. In the court of public opinion, many felt that when weighed against a short prison sentence, permanent deportation was far harsher. A deportation order, they argued, is like a life sentence in exile, stripping away the chance to reunite with family and severing the life Melissa had built from her early teens into adulthood. Moreover, in this case, deportation does not punish Melissa alone, it also plunges her entire family into prolonged heartbreak and separation, where children lose their mother, a husband loses his wife, and the parting has no clear end date. Many voices have also raised a painful comparison. Why do people who have committed far more serious crimes sometimes receive leniency, while a gentle woman like Melissa is treated so harshly? For their part, Melissa's family and attorneys still hold on to a fragile hope. They are urging Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger to grant Melissa a pardon for her old conviction. If that happens, they could seek to reopen her immigration case and request that the deportation order be vacated so Melissa can return to the United States. Even though the chances are slim, the Vietnamese community and many human rights organizations are still campaigning for the possibility of family reunification. In the end, public debate around the Melissa Tran case reflects a fierce tug-of-war between strict legal rules and human compassion. For many, this case exposes alarming flaws in the US immigration system. For others, it simply reinforces the principle of no exceptions in law enforcement. Even so, it raises painful questions about how justice is carried out and the real-life consequences of decisions that are framed as merely following the law. At the same time, Melissa's story also highlights the thin line between enforcing justice and abusing power. Melissa speaking out about detention conditions, an entirely legitimate exercise of free speech, appeared to become a thorn in ICE's side, prompting the agency to move swiftly to deport her as soon as it could. Although ICE continues to deny this, other cases have suggested a broader pattern of retaliation against those who dare to criticize the agency. And clearly, that possibility is frightening in real life. Because if public authorities adopt a mindset of punishing individuals for speaking up, the law, meant to be fair, can be distorted by emotion and power. As we close Melissa Tran's story, it is clear this is not an isolated case. In recent years, hundreds of Vietnamese people in the United States have fallen into similar circumstances, deported after decades of lawful residence due to shifts in immigration policy. And thousands of other Southeast Asians, including many Vietnamese, still live under suspended deportation orders and could be removed at any time. Melissa Tran's tragedy is therefore a reminder to the community to stay vigilant and legally informed, and a call for reform so that the law can be enforced in a more humane way. At around 7:30 p.m. on May 20th, 2018, as residents of the Spanish Cove mobile home community in San Jose were getting ready to rest after a long, exhausting day, they were suddenly startled by sharp popping sounds. At first, some thought it was just fireworks or maybe a tire blowing out. But when faint cries for help came from House 173, the home of Thao Coc Lu, neighbors began to sense that something was terribly wrong. A woman who lived nearby rushed over and looked through the crack of the door. What she saw made her go still. On the sofa, Kim Lan Lee, Mr. Thao's wife, was slumped over with her face covered in blood. Terrified, the neighbor screamed and immediately called 911, trembling with fear. Minutes later, patrol units from the San Jose Police Department arrived. They entered the home and quickly found the wife in critical condition, collapsed on the couch with a gunshot wound to the face. The husband, shot in the chest, had already stopped breathing on the bedroom floor deeper inside the house. Medical personnel were dispatched at once to rush Kim to the hospital. Noticing multiple unusual signs at the scene, police then secured the area and began a careful examination, determined not to miss a single detail. Inside the small mobile home of Mr. and Mrs. Thao Lu, the scene was filled with grief and dread. Bloodstains spread across the floor and the surrounding walls where the couple had collapsed, suggesting they were likely attacked from very close range. Authorities recovered 2 handgun-caliber shell casings, one found in the bedroom and one near the sofa area. This detail matched the initial assessment that each victim was struck by a single gunshot. The ammunition type and shooting angle indicated the perpetrator most likely used a handgun. Investigators quickly focused on key anomalies. First, there were no signs of forced entry. The doors were not pried open and the windows were intact. This suggested the victims may have opened the door for the killer, or that the killer already had a key to enter the home. Next, the scene showed no indication of a robbery. Household property appeared largely undisturbed. Mrs. Lee's wallet and jewelry were still there, belongings were neatly arranged, and items like the television and computer remained in place. These factors led investigators to rule out a typical theft-motivated crime early on. Based on the evidence collected, investigators initially believed the attack was premeditated. The killer entered the home without difficulty, quickly shot both husband and wife, and left within a short time before the incident could create a major disturbance in the neighborhood. Given the situation, police urgently worked to confirm the victims' identities in hopes of finding additional leads. Through neighbors and people close to the family, they learned that before the tragedy, the victims were known as a model household, gentle, quiet, and respected within the Vietnamese community in San Jose. Thao Quoc Lu, 70 years old, had immigrated from Vietnam to the United States decades earlier and gradually built a stable life in San Jose. In the local Vietnamese community, he was respected as someone who lived with moral purpose. A devout Buddhist, Mr. Thao maintained a daily routine of chanting and prayer and lived a simple, calm life. He also had a deep passion for Tai Chi and volunteered to teach it at the Vietnamese-American Community Center, personally guiding many older students to improve their health. In addition, Mr. Thao actively took part in charitable work and activities at local temples. To friends and neighbors, he was a model man who was always devoted to his family. Mr. Thao's wife, Kim Lan Ly, 68 years old, was a traditional Vietnamese woman who devoted herself to her husband and family. She married Mr. Thao when she was young, and the two endured many hardships during their early years as immigrants. In daily life, Mrs. Ly often supported her husband's community work, helping cook for Buddhist events or assisting during Tai Chi classes. Those who knew her described her as kind, composed, and quiet, yet always friendly and approachable. The couple had one son, Duong Lu, and even though he was already grown, Mrs. Ly often spoke proudly about him to friends. Overall, the Thao Lu couple lived a relatively peaceful life. In their later years, they had a small home and an income that was just enough to cover daily expenses. They also managed to save some money for retirement, planning to leave it to their son in the future. In the eyes of the community, both victims were seen as upstanding citizens with no criminal records and no known debts or conflicts with anyone. That was why, when the tragedy struck, many people were left stunned and unable to understand what could have been behind it. Immediately after the case was discovered, the San Jose Police Department quickly deployed its homicide unit, seasoned investigators tasked with clarifying what happened as soon as possible. The top priority at that moment was identifying a suspect based on the limited evidence at the scene and witness statements from the area. First, police canvassed the surrounding neighborhood and thoroughly interviewed nearby residents. Many neighbors said they heard 2 gunshots sometime after 7:30 p.m. Some also claimed they saw a car leaving the mobile home community shortly afterward. According to witness descriptions, the vehicle was dark-colored and a small sedan. Notably, a young man living near the entrance of the mobile home park recalled that he had seen the victim's son, Duong Lu, driving a car with very similar features several times before, coming in and out of the area with a friend. This lead immediately put investigators on alert. They quickly tried to contact Duong Lu, who was 25 at the time. Initial information showed Duong did not live with his parents, but rented a place in another part of the city, sharing it with a friend. However, when he was informed that his parents had been attacked, Duong Lu's reaction drew investigators' attention. He responded in a hesitant, vague manner, then quickly ended the call, saying he would go to the hospital later. This was seen as an unusual reaction for a son who had just learned his father had been killed and his mother was in critical condition. Based on these early details, the investigation quickly began to focus on the victim's only son. Investigators then reviewed the Lu family's finances and household relationships. They discovered that Mr. and Mrs. Lu had a savings account worth tens of thousands of dollars, and they were also listed as the owners of the home where they lived. Under normal circumstances, all of these assets would pass to Duong Lu if his parents died. That chain of information led investigators to a chilling hypothesis. Could this have been a calculated plan to seize an inheritance? To strengthen that line of thinking, detectives gathered more information about Duong Lu. They confirmed he was a 25-year-old man, the only son of Thao Lu and Kim Lan Ly. Born and raised in the United States in a Vietnamese immigrant family, Duong had a relatively provided-for childhood and received a great deal of care from his parents. Although the family was not wealthy, Mr. and Mrs. Thao Lu still did everything they could to support his education. Duong was once the family's great hope after being accepted into a local college, but he did not complete the program and dropped out midway, for reasons that were never clearly explained. After leaving school, Duong worked various part-time jobs but never held anything stable. By 2018, he moved in with a friend named Madison Mung. His unstable income often left him struggling financially. Some former friends said Duong occasionally complained about money, and they also noted that his relationship with his parents was no longer as comfortable as before, because Mr. and Mrs. Lu were fairly strict and had begun limiting the financial support they gave him. More recently, Duong Lu had shown increasingly obvious resentment after his parents refused to sell their home and give him money to invest in business. These simmering conflicts led investigators to pay even closer attention to the possibility that financial motives were behind the attack. At the same time, police identified Doong Lu's roommate as Madison Muing. Madison was Asian and grew up in the San Jose area. His personal circumstances were also unstable. He had dropped out of school early, lived recklessly, and had been warned in connection with a few minor scuffles, though he had no serious criminal record. Madison met Doong a few years earlier, and the two quickly became close because they had similar lifestyles. They also went back and forth to Doong's parents' home so often that Mr. and Mrs. Thao, Kim, were no strangers to them. Based on these details, detectives formed a hypothesis. If Doong Lu was the mastermind, then Madison Muing may have played a supporting role in the crime. On the morning of May 22nd, police secretly surveilled the apartment where Doong Lu and Madison Muing lived. As the two suspects stepped outside to get into their car, officers immediately rushed in and restrained them. Doong Lu and Madison Muing were arrested on the spot before they had any chance to react. During a search of the suspect's apartment, police recovered a handgun hidden inside a toolbox in the parking garage area. It was a 9mm pistol, and an initial test showed the barrel markings matched the shell casings recovered at the crime scene. In the interrogation room, Madison Muing initially tried to dodge responsibility, but after some time, he began to show clear fear. Realizing he could not keep denying it, Madison agreed to describe his role, hoping for leniency. According to investigators, Madison admitted that Doong Lu was the one who orchestrated the plan. He said Doong had promised that once everything was done, he would receive the inheritance and would share a portion with his best friend. That was why the two of them planned the crime together for weeks. On the night of the attack, Doong invited Madison to his parents' home under the pretext of a normal visit. Mr. and Mrs. Thao Lu had no suspicion and even welcomed their son and his friend inside for a drink. When Mr. Thao went into the bedroom, Doong signaled for Madison to follow. Madison carried a gun that Doong had prepared in advance, slipped into the room, and fired one shot into Mr. Lu's chest at close range, causing him to collapse immediately. Hearing the unusual sound, Kim Lee panicked and stood up, but Doong held her back. Madison ran out of the bedroom, saw her still crying out in terror, raised the gun, and fired directly into her face. After that, the two hurried out of the house, leaving Kim in critical condition. Investigators assessed that Madison's statement matched the evidence at the scene as well as the initial conclusions authorities had drawn. They also believed Madison's involvement stemmed from greed for money, along with dependence and blind loyalty to his friend. As for Doong Lu, after his arrest, he appeared calm and cold. At first, he denied any involvement, trying to maintain the image of a son in shock. But once he learned his friend had confessed and that police had clear evidence, Doong's expression gradually turned blank and shaken. Throughout the interrogation, he chose to remain silent on his attorney's advice, neither admitting anything nor offering any explanation for a motive. That cold, emotionless silence sent chills through many of those present. In terms of legal background, Doong Lu had virtually no notable criminal record. That fact only deepened public shock. A young man with an ordinary appearance and no obvious signs of instability could still carry out a crime of such extreme severity. Taken together, the portrait of the perpetrators gradually became clear. Two young men led astray by greed. One was willing to betray his own family. The other chose to assist in wrongdoing for personal gain. Both would have to face harsh punishment under the law, along with fierce condemnation from society. With the solid evidence collected, the investigation was quickly brought to a close. On May 24, 2018, police officially announced the arrests of Doong Lu, 25, and Madison Muing, 27, and charged both with murder and attempted murder. Notably, 3 months after the attack, on August 10, 2018, Kim Lan Lee died at the hospital due to the severity of her injuries. Her death led to upgraded charges against Doong and Madison, murder involving both victims, meaning the potential prison sentences became even more severe. After an urgent investigation, the case involving Mr. and Mrs. Thao Lu moved into criminal proceedings at the Santa Clara County Superior Court. Local public attention remained fixed on each development because this was not only an exceptionally serious case, but also one that raised deeply shocking moral questions. At their first court appearance in August 2018, both defendants denied the allegations, forcing prosecutors to rely entirely on the evidence they had gathered to prove the crimes. The official trial began around late 2020. Doong Lu and Madison Myung were tried together on charges involving the highest-level homicide allegations for the deaths of Thao Quoc Lu and Kim Lan Lee. The case also included special aggravating factors, including harm to multiple victims and a financial motive. Madison Myung also faced an additional allegation, as he was identified as the person who fired the shots, an element that could push his sentencing exposure even higher. And with all the facts presented in court, the maximum sentence both defendants faced was life in prison without the possibility of parole. After a relatively brief deliberation, the jury announced that Doong Lu and Madison Myung were guilty on all charges. The aggravating factors related to financial motive and harm to multiple victims were also found to be supported by the evidence. Upon hearing the verdict, Doong Lu closed his eyes and let out a long sigh, while Madison Myung burst into sobs, both seemingly aware that their free lives had effectively ended then and there. In early 2021, the court held the sentencing hearing. Based on the exceptionally serious nature of the case and the aggravating factors that had been established, the judge imposed the maximum punishment under California law: life in prison without the possibility of parole for both defendants. Specifically, each man was ordered to serve 2 top-level life sentences to be served consecutively, meaning they would have no chance of returning to a free life. The decision was met with applause from those in court supporting the victim's family. Many felt that justice had, at least in part, been served. However, attorneys for Doong Lu and Madison Myung immediately announced plans to appeal certain aspects of the case, arguing that applying 2 aggravating factors at the same time was excessively harsh. Later, Madison Myung formally filed an appeal with the California Court of Appeal. The defense centered its argument on the claim that the trial court had failed to exclude statements they believed were collected improperly. According to defense counsel, Madison was not fully informed of his right to an attorney before giving his statement, raising doubts about the statement's legal validity as evidence. However, in December 2023, the California Court of Appeal rejected Madison Myung's entire appeal and upheld the sentence of life without parole. Doong Lu's sentence was also upheld, as the defense arguments were deemed unpersuasive. In its ruling, the appellate court stated that police had fully complied with required procedures when advising Madison Myung of his Miranda rights. Case records showed each right was clearly read, along with the defendant's yes responses, confirming the statement was lawfully obtained. The panel also found that the overall body of evidence against the 2 defendants was overwhelming. Even without the contested statement, the verdict was not likely to change. With that decision, the legal path of the case was essentially concluded at the state level. Doong Lu and Madison Myung formally entered the remainder of their lives under life without parole sentences, with no chance of returning to freedom. The fact that a son attacked his own parents for an inheritance scheme sent shockwaves through the Vietnamese community in San Jose and sparked widespread outrage in the broader public. Right after the truth came to light, local media outlets continuously published articles and reports about the case. Many newspapers used chilling headlines such as "The Murderous Unfilial Child Case" or "A Tragedy in a Vietnamese Family." On social media, the community expressed non-stop outrage, with furious comments like, "I can't believe someone could have a child like that," or "This is unforgivable." Most of the public felt deep sorrow and compassion for Thao Lu and Kim Lee, 2 people who lived their entire lives with kindness and decency, yet in the end lost their lives because of the very child they had brought into the world. The case also forced many Vietnamese parents in the United States to reflect on how to raise children in modern society. Vietnamese language media in the US published multiple pieces analyzing Doong Lu's psychology and warning about a reality in which some children born and raised in America do not fully absorb traditional values of filial piety, and can be strongly influenced by an individualistic lifestyle. Although this was an extreme and rare case, the lesson remains clear. Immigrant parents need to pay closer attention to their children's inner lives and avoid letting simmering resentment linger, build up over time, and lead to unpredictable consequences. At the same time, the case sounded a stark alarm about greed and the erosion of moral standards. When money blinds conscience, people can sink into inhuman acts. And what do you think? Where did this tragedy truly begin? Was it caused by parents spoiling their child too much, or by the pressure of a materialistic, utilitarian lifestyle that the 2 perpetrators chose? At approximately 9:34 p.m., on the 15th of November 2023, the 911 dispatch center in Frisco began receiving a wave of panicked calls. Witnesses, including shoppers and employees around the Walmart on Preston Road, reported hearing a series of gunshots. Just minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of patrol cars tore through the night as officers raced to the scene. Under the dim yellow streetlights outside the store, police found 2 male victims lying not far apart. One had collapsed in the parking lot, while the other was discovered near the side of Hickory Road close by. Both had been shot multiple times and were in critical condition. In the middle of the chaos, a desperate phone call suddenly rang out from inside one victim's pocket. He had used his remaining strength to call a loved one and beg for help. This victim was quickly identified as Zachary, a Walmart employee who had just gotten off work and was walking home when tragedy struck. Both victims were immediately taken to the hospital for emergency treatment. After the ambulances left, the area was quickly sealed off for investigation. On the ground, authorities documented 2 blood-stained areas several dozen meters apart, one near a Walmart exit and the other along the roadside, matching the locations where the 2 victims fell. Based on the trail of blood at the younger victim's location, police believed he was likely attacked first and then tried to run. Under the flickering lights of patrol cars, investigators carefully collected every smallest clue. Spent shell casings scattered across the ground, along with Zachary's empty wallet lying nearby, indicated there had been a struggle and a robbery. That same night, patrol units were deployed at maximum capacity to search the surrounding area, while investigators reviewed traffic cameras and interviewed witnesses. A shaken Walmart employee said he heard about 5 shots in a row, and just seconds later, another burst of similar sounds came from a different part of the lot. Unfortunately, no direct witness clearly saw the shooter's face. They only heard the gunfire and briefly saw the shadow of a car speeding away into the night. From these details, an initial scenario began to take shape. It was highly possible that this was a botched robbery in the parking lot. The armed robber threatened the young man for money, then attacked him brutally. For some reason, the suspect then fired at the older man nearby, perhaps because that victim had accidentally witnessed the incident, or because he also became a target for robbery. The first obstacle Frisco police faced was identifying the second victim. At the hospital, due to the severity of his injuries, the man did not survive, and he had no identification documents on him. Fortunately, a lead emerged on the morning of the 16th of November 2023, when a woman rushed to the police station in a panic. She reported that her uncle had not returned home the night before, and she feared something terrible had happened after hearing news of the shooting outside Walmart. After verification, the victim's identity was painfully confirmed by his family. He was Doan Van Dung, 62 years old, and had only recently moved from Vietnam to the United States. According to relatives, Mr. Dung was gentle, humorous, and very hardworking. His wife had come to the United States 2 years earlier, while he remained in Vietnam for medical treatment before following later. It was not until 2022, after resolving his health issues and completing the necessary paperwork, that Mr. Dung was reunited with his wife in Frisco, Texas. His new life abroad had only just begun to stabilize. He kept his daily habit of taking walks for exercise and sometimes stopped by the Walmart near home to shop and gradually adjust to the local rhythm of life. Mr. Dung had 2 children, both already grown. His daughter lived with the family, while his son was studying at a university in Toronto, Canada. Even though he was already over 60, he still worked hard and saved every dollar to send support for his son's education. In many ways, Mr. Dung was a model husband and father, always willing to take the hardship upon himself to provide fully for his family. Neighbors in the apartment complex across from Walmart remembered Mr. Dung as a friendly older man who often walked around the neighborhood. He had no conflicts or enemies locally, partly because he had not been in the United States long, and partly because of his gentle, reserved personality. That was why his sudden death as the victim of a bloody attack left everyone in shock. The survivor was Zachary Lowe, 20 years old, a former service member who had recently been discharged from the United States Army. After returning to his hometown of Frisco, he got a job at the very Walmart where the shooting occurred. Though still in his early 20s, Zachary already had a wife, 2 young children, and another baby on the way. His family said he was responsible and hardworking, always doing his best to provide for his home. That night, Zachary had just finished a late shift and walked home as usual, a short route he had always believed was safe. But the terrifying experience changed him from a confident young man into someone deeply shaken, to the point that he no longer dared to walk home alone. Both victims in this case were decent people who lived for their families and had no connection to the perpetrator. That made the case even more tragic, and pushed police to find the person responsible as soon as possible to face justice. Because there was no connection between the perpetrator and the victims to trace, the early investigation ran into countless difficulties. At this point, all hope rested on forensic evidence and technology. From the shell casings recovered, examiners determined that the criminal used a common caliber semi-automatic handgun. In addition, based on gunpowder residue found on the victim's clothing, police concluded that the shooter had been standing very close to Zachary when he fired. Zachary Lowe, the only surviving victim, became the most important witness in the case. As soon as his condition stabilized, he gave police a detailed description of the perpetrator. According to Zachary, the suspect was a black man in his 40s, tall and large-built, wearing a black hooded jacket. Most notably, his voice did not sound like a local Texas accent. Zachary said the man approached him asking for a cigarette, then suddenly pulled out a gun and demanded money. Zachary handed over his wallet, and when the suspect briefly looked around, he turned and ran, but only a few seconds later, he was shot in the back. As he tried to crawl away to find an escape route, he saw the robber swing the gun toward another man nearby, followed by more deafening shots. This statement sent chills through investigators, because the perpetrator was so cold-blooded that he was willing to fire at both men, even though neither of them resisted. During the review, police found a security camera at an apartment complex across the street that had accidentally captured the sound and part of the image of the incident. Although the black and white video was quite blurry, the sound of gunfire was very clear. First, 5 shots in rapid succession, and about 8 seconds later, several more shots. The footage also showed that at that exact moment, a car suddenly accelerated out of the Walmart parking lot, sped onto Hickory Road, and disappeared into the night. This detail raised the possibility that the shooter had an accomplice waiting nearby, increasing the complexity of the case, because police now had to hunt for at least 2 suspects. Faced with that situation, specialized investigative techniques were brought in. A tech-focused investigative team began analyzing mobile phone data in the area around the time of the shooting. They pulled records from cell towers near Walmart to check whether any unfamiliar devices appeared or left abruptly, around 9:30 p.m. Indeed, the results showed that several out-of-area phone connections appeared on the tower closest to the scene. Notably, a few unfamiliar numbers from Louisiana connected to cell towers in the area at the exact moment the gunshots were fired, then disappeared shortly afterward. This clue matched Zachary's statement that the suspect's voice did not sound local. Could it have been a Louisiana accent? Even with that lead, identifying the actual owners of those numbers still required time and legal procedures. But while technicians were working through the analysis, an unexpected turning point emerged in early 2024, thanks to an anonymous tip. The tipster provided highly valuable information. They had overheard a man named Jarrell Harris bragging that he had made a large amount of money in Texas before later being jailed in Louisiana for another offense. The information was vague, but the details of this, Harris matched the suspect description closely, a black man in his 40s. Frisco police immediately coordinated with Louisiana authorities to investigate this individual. When they checked Harris's background, officers were stunned to learn that he was a serious repeat offender who had previously served time for charges related to conspiracy to take a life and aggravated assault. Harris's sudden appearance in Texas in mid-November 2023 was clearly unusual. Could he be the one behind the bloody robbery in Frisco? More importantly, the tip also mentioned a woman traveling with Harris named Stephanie, 37 years old, who was currently living in Monroe. Information on social media suggested she had a very close relationship with Harris, making it highly likely the two were together during the Walmart robbery. With this crucial lead in hand, investigators put all their effort into gathering more evidence linking Harris and Gaydon to the case. Authorities immediately sought court orders to extract mobile phone data for both suspects. The results confirmed an undeniable fact. Stephanie Gaydon's phone had pinged in the area of the Frisco Walmart on the fateful night of the 15th of November 2023. Not only that, location history showed that a week earlier, her device had traveled from Monroe to Collin County, Texas. This meant the pair had been in the Frisco area for about a week before the crime. That detail exposed a carefully calculated plan. Gaydon had driven Harris hundreds of miles to Texas, likely to scout the area and choose targets before striking. Investigators also reviewed Walmart's internal security cameras more closely and found footage showing Harris and Gaydon inside the store just a few days before the shooting. In the grainy video, Gaydon wore a bright red athletic jacket with LA printed on it, while Harris walked beside her in a black hoodie pulled over his head. They wandered through the store as if surveying the layout or waiting for an opportunity. This evidence indicated the pair had studied their target in advance. Notably, the outfit Harris wore in the video matched the clothing police later found near the crime scene after the shooting. After the attack, Harris likely discarded the clothes to avoid identification. At the same time, ballistic analysis of the shell casings recovered at the scene brought another major surprise. Using the Federal Ballistic Comparison System, experts discovered that the gun used in Frisco also appeared in another shooting just 24 days later. Specifically, in early December 2023, a shooting occurred in Monroe, where police also recovered shell casings. Comparison results showed those casings matched the casings from the Walmart incident exactly. It became a key piece of evidence tying Harris to the horrific tragedy in Texas. By May 2024, the Frisco Police Department, working with the Collin County District Attorney's Office, formally sought charges against Harris and Gaydon. After a closed-door session, a Collin County grand jury decided to indict both of them on first-degree murder charges. Harris was also additionally indicted for robbery and aggravated assault in connection with the injuries inflicted on Zachary. Because Harris was still serving a sentence in Louisiana for another offense at the time, Frisco investigators had to fly to Monroe in person to serve the arrest warrant related to the Texas case. As for Stephanie Gaydon, she was also caught in Monroe around the same time as Harris. However, unlike her accomplice, Gaydon was quickly transferred back to custody in Collin County, Texas. One notable development was that in January 2025, Gaydon's attorney succeeded in securing her release on bond after posting bail. Even so, she was required to wear an electronic monitoring device and comply strictly with house arrest conditions, with absolutely no leaving the registered residence. Court records also revealed Gaydon's severe financial hardship, so much so that in April 2025, the judge waived the monitoring equipment fee because she could not afford to pay it. Gaydon's release raised concerns for the victims' families, but authorities reassured the public that her every move was still being closely monitored. According to investigative records, Jarrell Harris, 42 years old, was a Louisiana resident with a frightening criminal history. Born and raised in Monroe, a small city with a relatively high crime rate, Harris fell into a life of crime early. He had previously served prison time at home for serious offenses such as attempted murder and intentional aggravated injury. In other words, Harris was no stranger to violence. In the local criminal underworld, he was seen as ruthless and reckless. Multiple sources suggested Harris had been involved with gangs, connected to illegal drugs, and relied on robberies to get by. Tragically, each time he was released, he not only failed to reform, but became even more hardened and aggressive. Notably, by November 2023, Harris was in a desperate financial situation. He may have needed money to pay off debts or sustain a reckless lifestyle. Instead of continuing to offend locally, Harris apparently decided to hunt far from shore to avoid drawing attention from Monroe police, who already knew him well. This may have been when he discussed the plan with Stephanie Gaydon, 37 years old, and brought her in to carry it out with him. In reality, Stephanie Gaydon was not an innocent bystander either. In Monroe, she was known as a single mother who lived on public assistance and questionable schemes. She was the one who drove Harris the long distance to Texas, and she waited outside while he carried out the crime. Harris likely targeted the Walmart area in Frisco because he saw it as busy but not heavily secured, and with easy access to major roads for a quick escape. On the night of the attack, Harris showed the full extent of his violent nature. Armed and prepared, he approached the victims to threaten and rob them, and he did not hesitate to pull the trigger even after the victim had complied. This revealed Harris's cruelty. To him, human life was worth less than the small amount of money he could steal. After the crime, Harris fled back to Louisiana, but before long, he fell back into his old ways and became involved in another shooting. It seemed the Texas attack left him with no regret or fear at all. Instead, he continued spiraling down the path of violence until he was finally caught by the law. In September 2025, the Collin County Court in Texas officially opened the trial of Jarrell Harris on charges of first-degree murder and related offenses. The trial drew intense attention from the local public. In the solemn atmosphere of the courtroom, Mr. Doong's family sat quietly in the victims section, holding tightly to one another's hands as they waited for justice to be done. Across the room, Harris appeared in an orange jail uniform with a short, stocky build and lifeless eyes. Because he consistently maintained his innocence throughout the legal process, prosecutors were forced to present sharp, detailed arguments to prove his guilt to the jury. The trial lasted 3 tense days, with a series of powerful pieces of evidence presented one after another. Faced with an unshakable body of proof, Harris was pushed almost to the wall. Witness Zachary Lowe bravely took the stand to recount the horrifying moment he was shot and how Mr. Doong indirectly saved his life by drawing the attacker's attention away. In the gallery, Mr. Doong's wife and daughter quietly nodded, as if finding a measure of comfort in hearing the survivors speak about their loved one's silent sacrifice. After only a brief deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Jarrell Harris was guilty of first-degree murder. When the sentence was read, Harris showed almost no emotion. His face remained blank and hardened. Because the prosecution did not seek the maximum penalty under Texas law for this charge, Harris was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. That meant he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, with no chance of ever returning to society. At the moment of sentencing, sighs of relief rose from the audience. Mr. Doong's family embraced one another and wept. They were tears of relief that justice had been served, mixed with a grief that nothing could ever erase. As for Zachary Lowe, the fortunate survivor, he shared that he felt satisfied that Harris did not receive the death penalty. Instead, Harris will have to spend the rest of his life in prison, reflecting on his crimes. Indeed, for someone who so casually disregarded human life, being forced to slowly waste away behind bars may be the most fitting punishment of all. In Stephanie Gayden's case, she was also indicted as an accomplice on a first-degree murder charge. However, as of late 2025, her trial had still not taken place. Gayden is expected to appear in court sometime in 2026. If convicted, she could face a similar life sentence, even if her role was indirect. The victim's family is anxiously awaiting that outcome, so the case can finally be closed in full. In many ways, the tragedy that happened to Mr. Doong sounded a warning to the community about how fragile safety can be. It shows that violence can strike anywhere, at any time, even in familiar places that seem the safest. At the time, the media and the public paid close attention to the case, not only because of its brutality, but also because of the moving story of quiet sacrifice. Mr. Doong, an immigrant searching for a better life, ultimately lost his life in a senseless, unjust way. Yet his final actions helped save a young man's life. And you, what lesson do you take away from today's story? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Early one morning in 1975, on a deserted beach near Pattaya, Thailand, 2 local fishermen panicked when they discovered the body of a young woman washed up on the sand. The victim had brown hair and was wearing nothing but a floral bikini. Based on her appearance, she appeared to be Western. At 7 o'clock in the morning, investigator Sobhraj arrived at the scene. At first glance, he saw no signs of a struggle or any fatal wounds. The girl looked as though she had drowned while swimming. There were also no identification documents or passport anywhere nearby. With everyone in agreement, forensic examiners conducted an autopsy and quickly made a shocking discovery. The victim had not died in an accidental drowning as initially assumed. She had been held underwater until she stopped breathing. Faint bruising on the back of her neck in the shape of fingers indicated that someone had forcefully pinned her down in the water. Investigator Sobhraj shuddered as he realized the original scene was far too clean. There were no signs of a fight and no evidence of cries for help. Clearly, the perpetrator was highly calculating. He may have been on a boat with the victim, attacked her there, and then calmly threw her into the sea to erase the evidence. But who could commit something so monstrous? While Thai police were still struggling to make sense of the unidentified bikini-clad victim, a few weeks later, another horrifying discovery was made at a different location. Near the Pattaya resort area, a badly charred male body was found, difficult to identify. All that remained were a few bone fragments and scorched personal belongings. All identification papers had disappeared. At the scene, police quickly found a pair of metal-framed sunglasses near what remained of the body, along with tire tracks pressed into the sandy ground. The killer may have driven the body there, poured gasoline over it, set it on fire, and then left. However, because there were so few clues at both scenes, Pattaya police initially hit a dead end in forming a theory or investigative direction. They also began to fear they were facing something far more serious than a random accident. With no trace of the perpetrator, police were forced to begin tracking leads from the bodies themselves. In the case of the girl on the beach, Thai police coordinated with multiple consulates to cross-check lists of their citizens reported missing. At the same time, they circulated the victim's photo and identifying features for easier comparison. Eventually, a family in Seattle, the United States, heard reports about a young woman who had drowned and whose description matched their daughter. They immediately reached out and offered assistance with identification. Using a photograph provided by her relatives and fingerprint records, the unidentified bikini-clad girl was confirmed to be Teresa Knowlton, 21 years old, an American citizen. She was born in Seattle to a middle-class family and carried the free-spirited personality of the 1970s hippie generation. She had temporarily put her studies on hold and was traveling across Asia to find herself and experience new cultures. With sparkling blue eyes and an innocent smile, Teresa made friends easily with everyone she met along the way. Friends said she was kind and easygoing, always willing to share food or a place to stay with locals and fellow travelers. Her family said Teresa Knowlton had planned to go to Nepal to seek refuge in a Buddhist temple, but then she suddenly lost contact. Moreover, it was her first time in Thailand, so it was unlikely she could have made an enemy serious enough to lead to tragedy. As for the male body, identification also began to move forward. A woman named Charmaine Carew, 26 years old, reported receiving a highly unusual phone call from her boyfriend, who said he was going to Pattaya with a married couple he had just met, and then he disappeared without a trace. Suspecting something was wrong, Charmaine flew from her hometown in Israel to Bangkok to search for him. She brought a photograph of the victim and provided details about the new friends her boyfriend had mentioned. They were a man and a woman, the man of mixed Asian and European heritage, who claimed to be in the gemstone trade, dressed elegantly, and traveled with a young man of Indian origin and a Frenchman. From there, police learned that the male victim was Vitaly Hakim, 25 years old, an adventurous, charming Israeli man who wanted to leave home to explore Southeast Asia and look for business opportunities. Investigators later went to the hotel where Vitaly had been staying and found that his clothes and luggage were still in the room. Only his passport and wallet were missing. 2 murders had occurred within a short period of time, and both victims were backpacker travelers. With both victims' identification documents missing, police gradually leaned toward the theory of robbery murder. They also focused their investigation on Vitaly's group of friends, as Charmaine Carew had described. She helped sketch the suspects' profiles and led police to the apartment the group had rented in Bangkok. Just as everything seemed about to become clear, another twist occurred. This time, the victim was none other than Charmaine Carew. 9 days after arriving in Thailand to work with police on the case, she was found dead, her body floating off Pattaya Beach. The victim was also wearing only a bikini, just like Teresa before her. The death of the young woman from Israel left Thai police stunned. Carew had clearly been killed to silence a lead, proving the perpetrator was exceptionally ruthless and reckless. Once again, the scene was staged to look like an accidental drowning, but by this point, the Bangkok media was no longer fooled. On the front pages of major newspapers, the headline, "The Bikini Killer," appeared again and again. Public panic reached a peak, and people demanded that police capture the culprit quickly to restore peace to this famous tourist destination. Recognizing the severity of the case and its cross-border network, Thai police quietly contacted Interpol to expand the investigation. They decided not to publicly release suspect information in order to avoid tipping the killer off. Instead, a special task force was secretly launched with the participation of police from multiple countries. From Thailand, investigators fanned out to collect statements from people who had encountered the suspect group. Dominique Renelot, a French tourist who had spent time with the mysterious couple, became a key witness. He said they had helped treat him when he suffered food poisoning, but he nearly died only escaping because he sensed something was wrong and fled in time. After returning to Paris, Renelot immediately wrote a letter detailing everything and sent it to Bangkok police. Based on that information, Interpol searched international crime databases and found a file matching a mixed heritage man who used multiple aliases and had a prior record of escaping from prison in Afghanistan in 1971. However, his true identity remained unknown because the file contained many different false names. Fortunately, one person's involvement changed the course of the investigation. He was Herman Nippenberg, a consular official at the Dutch embassy in Bangkok. He had been tasked with locating two missing Dutch citizens from late 1975, Henk Bintanja, 29 years old, and his fiancée, Cornelia Kakihemker, 25 years old. They had left Amsterdam to travel around the world, but disappeared after reaching Thailand. Using Renelow's letter and other clues, Nippenberg connected the dots and realized the victims had all associated with the same foreign man and woman. He began investigating independently, tracing the victims' travel routes, and interviewing taxi drivers and hotel owners in Bangkok. After weeks of searching, Nippenberg identified the address of the apartment the couple had rented. He persuaded Thai police to search the place. As a result, it was here that a horrifying trove of evidence was discovered, including passports belonging to several victims, along with identification documents, plane tickets, and photographs. In addition, police also found a large quantity of sleeping pills and an herbal powder called majade, a substance that causes severe diarrhea, closely matching the detail about food poisoning that the near victim Dominique Renelow described in his letter. Unfortunately, the evidence remained, but the perpetrator had already fled. The killer's whereabouts went completely cold for a time. It was not until July 1976 that an unexpected lead came in from India. New Delhi police arrested a suspicious man who was very likely the perpetrator Thailand had been hunting. What made it remarkable was how absurdly ironic the arrest was. The cunning criminal was not caught by police, but was instead turned in after his own victims fought back. Specifically, in late July 1976, the criminal group moved to New Delhi, impersonated tour guides, and invited a group of French students on a sightseeing trip. Before dinner at the Vikram Hotel, they handed each student a pill, falsely claiming it was medicine to prevent dysentery because Indian food might not suit European stomachs. 3 students, wary of the situation, did not take the pills. They ultimately joined forces to restrain the suspect and handed him over to New Delhi police. 2 American women traveling with him were also arrested and quickly confessed to a plot to poison and rob their targets. They also revealed another case in which the victim was a French man named Jean-Luc Solomon. News that the man arrested in India was the suspect behind the Bikini murders quickly caused an international shock. Police in Thailand, Nepal, Turkey, and elsewhere simultaneously sent case files and evidence to New Delhi to coordinate the investigation. At this point, the crafty criminal's true identity was revealed for the first time, opening the door to a terrifying story of his gruesome criminal journey. His name was Charles Gurumukh Sobhraj, born on the 6th of April, 1944, in Saigon. His father was an Indian man who traded in silk, and his mother was a young Vietnamese woman. Their brief relationship ended when Sobhraj was not yet a month old. His biological father vanished without a trace, leaving mother and child behind. Without a father's love, Sobhraj grew up in poverty in Saigon. At the age of 3, his mother remarried a French officer, and the boy moved with his stepfamily to Paris after the Indochina War ended in 1954. In France, Sobhraj felt like an outsider even within his own family. His strict stepfather and his half-siblings made him feel constantly inferior. The relationship between him and his stepfather was distant and faint, almost non-existent. And so, Charles Sobhraj's teenage years quickly slid into a life of crime. Intelligent and sly, but deeply resentful, he dropped out of school, drifted through the back streets of Paris, and ran with vagrants and petty criminals. But Sobhraj soon displayed a particular talent. He could speak multiple languages, had a handsome face, and a smooth, persuasive way with words. However, instead of using his talent in the right place, he chose to live as a street punk, specializing in pickpocketing and petty theft to fund his lifestyle. In 1963, at the age of 19, Sobhraj was imprisoned for the first time for car theft. In Poissy prison in France, he still appeared quick-witted. Thanks to his foreign language skills, guards often asked him to interpret. A wealthy philanthropist named Félix Descone, who frequently visited inmates, took notice of the young man of Asian descent who looked unusually educated. Feeling sorry for Sobhraj, Felix brought him books and newspapers and urged him to turn his life around. On the surface, Sobhraj acted grateful. He learned refined manners from his benefactor, and before long, he could speak elegantly and had completely dropped the street habit of swearing. The image of a dignified gentleman began to take shape in Sobhraj, masking the delinquent nature underneath. After his release in 1965, Sobhraj even won Felix's favor to the point that Felix invited him to live in his home. At the high society parties in Paris that Felix took him to, Sobhraj tasted material glamour for the first time, from Italian suits and polished leather shoes to champagne and caviar. But bottomless greed and a desire to live richly without working pushed him back onto the wrong path, secretly stealing cars to support himself. In just a few months, Sobhraj successfully stole 9 brand new Citroën cars in Paris. He even brazenly stole a Cadillac right in front of a luxury hotel, allowing police to identify him through hotel staff testimony. In September 1968, Sobhraj was stopped and arrested right after stealing a car. In court, with his talent for acting, he cried and claimed he had only borrowed the vehicle because he feared being late to propose to his girlfriend. This ridiculous excuse was unexpectedly accepted by the court because his girlfriend Chantal Compagnon testified to help him. As a result, Sobhraj received only an 8-month prison sentence. Immediately after his release, Charles Sobhraj and Chantal married despite her family's objections. By early 1970, Chantal was pregnant, and Sobhraj decided to flee France. He had friends arrange a forged passport under a different name, then took his wife overland to Asia, traveling through Middle Eastern countries to avoid detection. In September 1970, the Sobhraj arrived in Mumbai, India. There, Chantal was persuaded by her husband to take part in scams and theft. They posed as a wealthy European tycoon couple on holiday, befriended other travelers, and then invited them to drink alcohol laced with sleeping pills. When the victims were unconscious, the couple coldly searched them and took everything cash, credit cards, passports, jewelry, cameras, and more. In 1970 alone, the couple stole property estimated at no less than 145,000 francs, equivalent to around $26,000 at the time. In October 1970, Chantal gave birth to a baby girl in Mumbai. But becoming a father did not slow Sobhraj's crimes. On the contrary, he told himself he had to work harder to earn money to support his small family. In 1971, Sobhraj committed his first deliberate killing. He attacked and disposed of a taxi driver in Pakistan in order to steal the vehicle. Not long after, he was arrested in Kabul, Afghanistan, for theft, but escaped from prison. Sobhraj pretended to have such severe stomach pain that he was taken to a hospital, then drugged a guard and fled. That time, his wife Chantal acted as an accomplice, helping him escape. The couple then fled across the border into Iran. There, Chantal and their newborn daughter were arrested and repatriated to Canada. Charles Sobhraj, meanwhile, fled alone to Europe. After disappearing for a period, he was arrested in Athens, Greece, in 1973 for robbery, but made a dramatic escape while awaiting trial. According to records, he once again faked illness to ensure looser supervision, then exploited an opening to escape, leaving his half-brother Andre to receive an 18-year prison sentence in his place. From that point on, the name Charles Sobhraj began to appear on international wanted lists. But he had already slipped back into Asia, where he continued to spread the shadow of death. To get spending money, Sobhraj returned to his old playbook. While traveling across India, about 2 hours before reaching a station where he planned to change trains, Sobhraj would invite a fellow passenger sharing his compartment to drink with him. Once they lost consciousness, he would clean them out of everything they had. By the time the carriage attendant noticed the passenger was unnaturally fast asleep, Sobhraj was already calmly on another train with the money he had just stolen. During his first days in Bangkok, Sobhraj rented a room at a small hotel on Sharon Krung Road and wandered around looking for ways to make a living. One day, at the floating market on the Chao Phraya River, he happened to meet a Canadian woman, a medical secretary from the city of Quebec named Marie-Andrée Leclerc. Playing the role of a seasoned traveler, Sobhraj passionately told her about the places he had been, such as Iran, India, Turkey, Greece, and more. Drawn to Sobhraj's romantic, drifting spirit, after only a few meetings, Marie packed up her things and moved in with him as if they were husband and wife. And just like that, Sobhraj was no longer alone on his criminal journey. He now had a reliable accomplice at his side, carrying out every order he gave. To make his scams even more foolproof, Sobhraj recruited additional help, an Indian teenager named Ajay Chowdhury. Sobhraj met Ajay when the boy was starving in a park. After being fed, given new clothes, and offered a place to stay, Ajay felt grateful and became obedient to Sobhraj like a servant to a master. That was how Sobhraj successfully lured him into a life of crime. After that, Sobhraj, Marie, Ajay formed a trio of killers responsible for a string of horrific murders across Asia, targeting backpacker travelers eagerly exploring the East. Yet their methods were not much different from before. Sobhraj played the role of a charming, well-educated gentleman, openly sharing culture with tourists. Then, once he gained their trust, he struck quickly. Some victims were believed to have been drugged and drowned, while others were stabbed and then drenched in gasoline and burned beyond recognition before being dumped by the roadside. Later, he admitted he was involved in at least 12 murders from 1972 to 1976 in Asia. However, many investigators believe the real number was far higher. After he was arrested in India in 1977, Sobhraj was prosecuted for poisoning a group of French tourists and for attacking Jean-Luc Solomon. However, at the time, India's justice system could only convict him for robbery and other criminal offenses, while the Solomon case lacked direct evidence. Because of that, Charles Sobhraj avoided the death penalty in India and received a 12-year prison sentence for robbery. Marie-Andrée Leclerc, his lover, was sentenced to 7 years in prison but was released early after 2 years due to terminal stage ovarian cancer. She returned to Canada and died in 1984. Two American female accomplices, Barbara and Mary, each received 2 years in prison for aiding robbery. But even behind bars, Sobhraj lived like a king. His cell lacked nothing: a television, air conditioning, a refrigerator, a telephone, even a hot bathtub. His meals were fit for royalty. From time to time, Sobhraj even threw parties and invited prison guards to attend, so they turned a blind eye, allowing one of Sobhraj's lawyers, Sneha Sengar, to enter his cell and sleep with him. In that sense, it can be said that justice in India did not fully reflect the extent of Sobhraj's crimes. After his release, he was deported to France. There, the once notorious killer lived in comfort, demanding $5,000 for an interview from anyone curious about his private life. He declared, "No money, no meeting." Even in March 2002, an Indian film company announced it would make a movie about Sobhraj's life. The film's assistant director said they had signed a $15 million USD contract to buy the rights to Sobhraj's crime-filled life story. So, from a repeat offender in and out of prison, Sobhraj once again got to live like a celebrity. Many media outlets were willing to pay money to photograph the killer as he enjoyed a wealthy lifestyle. By this point, many of you may be wondering why Sobhraj kept committing crimes in Thailand in 1975 and 1976, yet there was never any trial there. The answer lies with Sobhraj himself. Even while imprisoned, he was calculating, determined to avoid being extradited to stand trial in Thailand because he knew he could very well face the death penalty there. And so, in 1986, with only a few years left on his prison sentence in India, Sobhraj staged a prison escape. Although he was recaptured 2 days later, he showed no fear because it was all part of his plan to have his sentence extended by another 10 years. By the time he finished serving his sentence in India, the charges for the crimes he committed in Thailand had passed the statute of limitations. And just like that, he slipped through the hands of investigators right in front of them. But karma eventually came due. Escaping once worked, yet the second time, Sobhraj walked straight into a trap of his own making. In September 2003, while living comfortably in France, he suddenly decided on a whim to fly to Nepal, where cases linked to him were still within the statute of limitations. Not missing this golden opportunity, Nepalese police went to the Casino Royale at the Yak and Yeti Hotel in Kathmandu and arrested Sobhraj on the spot. At first, he was charged only with using a forged passport to enter Nepal in 1975. It was not until the trial in Kathmandu, Nepal, in 2004 that justice was truly enforced against Charles Sobhraj. The court relied on indirect evidence to convict him of killing Connie Jo Bronzich in 1975. However, in court, Sobhraj appeared in a neatly pressed suit and defended himself forcefully, claiming he had never even been in Nepal in 1975 and that everything was a frame-up. Even so, He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Sobhraj later appealed to a higher court but failed, and he was even found to have plotted another prison break, leading to tighter supervision. But the twists in Sobhraj's life were not over. In 2008, from behind bars, Sobhraj shocked the media once again by suddenly announcing his engagement to a 23-year-old Nepalese woman named Nihita Biswas. She was the daughter of Sobhraj's defense lawyer and also served as his interpreter. That meant she fully knew who he was, yet still chose to marry him. Of course, the public had long known about Sobhraj's persuasive tongue and manipulative tricks, but the fact that a young woman agreed to marry him when he was already in his 60s and serving a life sentence was still genuinely hard to believe. Even more brazenly, on the 7th of July, 2008, Sobhraj issued a press statement through his young wife, claiming he had never been convicted by any court of taking a life and demanded that the media not call him a serial killer. But he could not keep smiling for long. In 2014, a second trial in Nepal sentenced him to a second life term for the murder of Laurent Carrière, reinforcing the likelihood that he would not be released early before 2023. Although his family lobbied aggressively, Schindler even calling on the president of France to intervene, no one could save Sobhraj from a long imprisonment in Kathmandu. Sobhraj's trials in Nepal were closely followed by global media. Yet he always turned the courtroom into a stage, appearing with a crooked half smile, wearing dark sunglasses, waving at reporters, and insisting he was innocent. And just when it seemed Sobhraj would die behind bars, after nearly 2 decades in custody, in late 2022, he was unexpectedly ordered released early by Nepal's Supreme Court on the grounds of age and health. The decision sparked fierce controversy. Many were outraged, arguing that a brutal criminal who should have spent the rest of his life behind bars should not be shown mercy simply because of old age. However, the court argued that Nepalese law allows elderly prisoners to receive clemency if they have served more than 75% of their sentence and suffer from a serious illness. In December 2022, Charles Sobhraj, then 78 years old, officially walked out of Kathmandu Central Prison to widespread disbelief. He was escorted directly to the airport and deported to France that same evening, on the 23rd of December, 2022. Nepalese police even issued a careful order banning Sobhraj from entering the country for the next 10 years. On the flight back to freedom, Sobhraj maintained his arrogant attitude. He told AFP reporters that he was innocent and would return to France to sue the Nepalese government for daring to imprison him for nearly 20 years. But to this day, no lawsuit has ever been filed. That is the full story of Charles Sobhraj, a legendary life, but in the most negative sense of the word. His dramatic and brazen criminal journey has inspired numerous books, investigative works, and feature films. Beyond the nickname The Bikini Killer, he is also remembered by other notorious labels such as The Serpent and the most famous Vietnamese-born serial killer. At the same time, countless rumors and unverified stories have spread everywhere, further fueling the aura of mystery surrounding his name. On the 20th of January, 2014, the family of a 17-year-old Vietnamese-American student named Ngoc Bao-Pham anxiously contacted police to report her sudden disappearance. Earlier, at around 10 o'clock in the morning, she had left her apartment in the 8,200 block of Broadway, Houston, telling her family she was going to meet a friend nearby. From that moment on, her family could no longer reach her. In utter panic, they alerted authorities and also began searching for clues on their own by contacting people she knew. Lun Hoang Vu, 19 years old, an ex-boyfriend who lived in the same apartment complex, was among the first people the family contacted. Over the phone, Lun said that Vi had stopped by his place and then left to meet another friend more than 1 kilometer away. However, this response only heightened the family's concern because all of Vi's friends confirmed they had not seen her that day. Later that evening, Vi's family suddenly received a text message in English from an unknown number. The sender claimed to have kidnapped the girl and demanded a ransom of 50,000 USD, threatening to take her life if the full amount was not paid within 2 weeks. Although the message included no photos or proof that the victim was still alive, the family immediately reported it to police and urgently began preparing the ransom. The Houston Police Department launched an immediate investigation and issued alerts statewide. Information about the teenager's disappearance spread rapidly, drawing intense attention from the media and the Houston community. Police teams fanned out everywhere to search for leads, from tracing phone signals to questioning anyone who might have information about Vi. The most valuable clue at that moment was the ransom text message the victim's family had received. Using advanced investigative technology, the Houston Police Department urgently traced the origin of the message. After carefully analyzing the phone number and the sending device, in less than 2 days, technicians reached a shocking conclusion. The extortion text had been sent from the very phone of Lun Hoang Vu, Vi's ex-boyfriend. The discovery left investigators stunned and furious. It turned out that the mysterious figure who had been playing games with law enforcement all along was someone they had already met and interviewed from the very beginning. From there, the underlying motive also began to surface. According to friends, the relationship between Vu and Vi lasting more than a year had started to crack, and there were even reports that Vi wanted to break up because she had someone new. This detail aligned perfectly with the theory of a crime of passion. However, major questions remained unanswered. Why would Vu stage a kidnapping for ransom scheme, and where was the victim now? On the 22nd of January, police summoned Lun Hoang Vu back to headquarters, saying they needed additional information. At first, Vu continued to evade and deny wrongdoing. But as investigators presented one piece of undeniable digital evidence after another, his expression began to change. Sensing that the suspect's resolve was breaking, investigators persisted mixing pressure with persuasion until he finally spoke. In the end, Lun Hoang Vu lowered his head, admitted guilt, and began confessing everything. It turned out Vu had not only kidnapped Vi, he had coldly taken her life. The information shocked police. Even worse, he seemed almost proud as he explained his twisted motive. Vu claimed that beyond romantic jealousy, he also wanted to test whether American police were truly as skilled as people said. That arrogant confession left investigators both stunned and enraged, because the perpetrator had treated a human life like a sick intellectual game. At that point, the killer's identity was clear. The next difficult task for the investigation was to locate Vi's body and gather enough physical evidence to charge Lun Hoang Vu. First, police instructed Vu to provide detailed information and draw a map of where he had hidden the victim. In response, Vu calmly took a pen and sketched directions to a stretch of Sims Bayou, marking a spot under a bridge where Vi's body was located. He even personally led investigators to the scene, coldly pointing to the exact place where he had pushed Vi into the water. Following Vu's directions, on the evening of the 22nd of January, 2014, at a narrow branch of Sims Bayou in southeast Houston, not far from Vi's apartment complex, divers from the Houston Fire Department found the body of a young girl. The victim was discovered tightly wrapped in a bedsheet. The identifying details, age, build, and clothing matched the missing person description of Vi exactly. Even more heartbreaking, bruises and injuries on her body showed that she had suffered a violent assault before taking her final breath. Soon after, Vi's relatives were asked to come and complete the identification procedure. In overwhelming grief, they confirmed it was indeed the daughter who had gone missing. Although the perpetrator's identity was already clear, forensic personnel at the scene still worked urgently to collect every piece of physical evidence left behind to strengthen the case. The white bedsheet used to wrap the body was sent for examination to trace its origin. Around the riverbank, police also carefully searched for tire marks, shoe prints, or any objects that might be connected to the crime. Beneath the mud near the water's edge, they found a small broken branch with traces of dried blood. This was likely the weapon the perpetrator used to attack the victim. The branch was immediately sent for testing and comparison with Vi's DNA. As investigators built the case file, they also reconstructed a detailed timeline. Under questioning, Lun Hoang Vu admitted that on the morning of the 20th of January, he had arranged to meet Vi, claiming he wanted one last conversation about their relationship. Vu confessed that he was still obsessed and could not accept that they had broken up, especially after learning that Vi had a new boyfriend. According to his statement, at around 10 o'clock in the morning, Vi walked from her home to Vu's apartment complex right next door. There, Vu stopped her in the walkway and begged to speak privately. However, Vi bluntly refused, saying there was nothing left to discuss, and decisively turned and walked away. That cold rejection was like the final straw for Vu. In a frenzy, he rushed forward and grabbed Vi. The girl screamed in fear, struggling to break free from his grip. With the twisted belief that he could not at any cost lose Vi to someone else, Vu chased her and forced his ex-girlfriend toward an empty lot beside a channel of Sim's Bayou behind the residential area. At the deserted riverbank, their argument escalated violently. While Vi accused Vu of refusing to respect her decision, the ex-boyfriend obsessively demanded to know about her new boyfriend. Blind jealousy quickly turned into violence when Vu suddenly picked up a branch from the ground and struck Vi hard on the back of the head. The sudden blow left the young girl dazed and collapsing. In an uncontrollable burst of violence, Vu attacked the victim until she stopped breathing. Once he realized he had committed murder, Luân Hoang Vu stood frozen for a moment, then quickly regained his composure and began plotting how to erase the evidence. He dragged the victim and temporarily hid her in bushes along the river, then hurried back to his apartment to get a bedsheet. Returning to the scene, Vu tightly wrapped Vi's small body in the white cloth. Taking advantage of the quiet midday hours, he carried the body and dumped it into Sim's Bayou beneath the bridge. As the murky water swallowed the victim, Vu believed no one would ever find her. But he could not have known that this attempt to dispose of the body would conceal his crime for only 2 short days. After finishing, Vu returned home to scrub away all traces. He changed his clothes and went about his life as if nothing had happened. Even when Vi's relatives called to ask, he stayed unnervingly calm, lying that she had gone to meet someone else. That night, perhaps feeling his cover story still wasn't perfect, Vu came up with a plan to mislead investigators by staging a kidnapping for ransom. He believed that because Vi's family was relatively well off, a ransom text message would seem highly convincing. With that plan in mind, sometime between the night of the 20th of January and the early morning of the 21st of January, Vu composed an English text message and sent it to Vi's relatives in Vietnam, demanding a ransom of 50,000 USD within a 2-week deadline. His real goal was to buy time and create the illusion that Vi was still alive, so the family and police would not immediately search the area where he had disposed of her body. Just as Vu intended, attention initially focused on the kidnapping for ransom theory, and suspicion toward him temporarily eased. By the 21st of January, when police began their investigation, Luân Hoang Vu still played the role of a deeply worried ex-boyfriend perfectly. He voluntarily joined search groups and answered questions with a sorrowful expression. Later, Vu admitted that he had almost confessed everything that day. However, he chose to stay silent for an arrogant reason. He had heard that American police were very skilled, and he wanted to test their abilities. In his twisted mind, Vu likely viewed challenging the police as a cat-and-mouse game to see how long it would take them to uncover his crime. But he was wrong. Just 1 day later, investigators traced the lead from the ransom message, backed him into a corner, and forced him to reveal himself. With a detailed confession, solid physical evidence, and an obvious motive, Houston police formally charged Luân Hoang Vu with the highest level of homicide under Texas law due to especially aggravated circumstances. Vu was quickly taken into custody and denied bond, held at the Harris County Jail while awaiting legal proceedings. From a young man with a wide-open future, Luân Hoang Vu turned himself into a dangerous criminal and now faced the harshest punishment under the law. To better understand the motive and the true nature of this crime, let's look back at Luân Hoang Vu's background and his relationship with the victim before the case occurred. At the time of the crime, Luân Hoang Vu, 19 years old, was a Vietnamese citizen who had immigrated to the United States about 5 years earlier. He lived in Houston with relatives, while his biological parents appeared to still be in Vietnam. In terms of education, Vu had completed high school and was preparing for his next steps, such as attending college or finding a job. To friends, he was quiet and obsessed with video games, yet he also seemed quite sharp. That intelligence was reflected, in part, by the calculated plan he devised to conceal his crime. In addition, some people believe Vu was rather eccentric and self-centered in his social relationships. As for his relationship with the victim, as mentioned earlier, Vu and Ngoc Bao-Pham had dated for more than a year. V came to the United States to study in 2012, lived with relatives in Houston, and was a senior at Chavez High School. Friends and teachers said Vi was kind, hardworking, and energetic. With her bright smile and strong academic performance, she was well liked by everyone around her. One notable detail was that Vi's family was relatively well off. Her father was a successful businessman in Ho Chi Minh and regularly sent money to support his daughter's education abroad. This factor helps explain why Vu developed the idea of extorting the victim's family after the tragedy. To outsiders, Vu and Vi seemed like a beautiful couple, sharing the same homeland and trying to build a life in the United States. But few people knew that Vu's feelings for Vi had gradually twisted into toxic possessiveness. He could not accept the idea of her being with anyone else. According to the victim's friends, when Vi expressed that she wanted to break up, Vu flew into rage and repeatedly threatened that something would happen if she insisted on leaving him. While it cannot be confirmed whether Vu had a mental disorder, his brutal violence and the calculated steps he took afterward showed that he posed an extremely high level of danger to society. Before this case, Lun Hoang Vu's record showed no serious criminal history. However, this incident exposed signs of distorted psychology and the latent danger within him. The motive clearly stemmed from blind jealousy and a loss of control after romantic rejection. At the same time, the act of sending messages to challenge the police revealed another dark side of the perpetrator's mindset: arrogance and a warped desire to prove his intelligence. Treating the investigation like a game to satisfy his curiosity reflected a chilling coldness and terrifying lack of empathy. Notably, after being arrested, instead of showing remorse, Vu displayed a fiercely defiant attitude. He accused police of discrimination and even filed lawsuits against certain officials and journalists, claiming they had violated his rights. Although those legal actions were quickly dismissed by the court, they clearly reflected Lun Vu's stubborn, self-important nature. He seemed to always look for ways to blame others rather than take responsibility for the crimes he had committed. After the investigation was completed, Lun Hoang Vu was formally indicted on a charge of first-degree murder with an aggravating factor of kidnapping. In Texas, penalties for this offense are extremely severe, including life imprisonment without parole or the maximum sentence if the legal elements of an especially grave crime are met. The case drew intense public attention. Local newspapers and TV stations widely reported Vu's arrest. The Vietnamese community in Houston was also shaken, stunned that a young man from their own community could commit such a horrific crime abroad. During the legal process, his court-appointed defense attorney worked to negotiate a deal to help him avoid the harshest possible sentence. Reports suggested that Vu agreed to plead guilty and cooperate in exchange for prosecutors not seeking the death penalty. After that, the prosecution agreed to pursue a lesser homicide charge rather than the highest level charge, allowing the case to move more quickly through court. In October 2015, at the Harris County Courthouse, Lun Hoang Vu stood before the court with a pale face after nearly 2 years in custody. The courtroom fell silent as the prosecutor laid out the chilling acts Vu had committed. The victim's family, who had come from Vietnam, could only sit and weep quietly in unbearable grief. Faced with undeniable evidence, Lun Hoang Vu lowered his head and pleaded guilty. He told the court that he was deeply remorseful, claiming that he had lost his mind because he loved her too much and was consumed by jealousy. But that belated regret could not ease the family's devastating pain. Through tears, Vi's mother spoke, saying she hoped the court would impose the harshest sentence possible on the perpetrator. After deliberation, the court sentenced Lun Hoang Vu to 50 years in prison in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. The sentence meant Vu would spend his youth behind bars. He would have to serve at least 25 years before even becoming eligible for parole consideration, and his chance of regaining freedom remained extremely slim. When the verdict was read, Vu kept his head down and said nothing. Cold handcuffs locked around his guilty wrists as he was escorted back to jail. The trial ended with a fitting sentence, though not the maximum penalty. It was long enough to ensure the perpetrator would pay a heavy price for his brutality. As of today, Lun Hoang Vu remains incarcerated within the Texas prison system. He has been held at the Telford Unit, a maximum security facility for serious offenders. In the early years of his sentence, Vu filed appeals on vague grounds and even brought civil lawsuits accusing police of violating his rights. However, all of those desperate attempts were flatly rejected by the courts. Justice was fully served, and Lun Hoang Vu will have to face his own conscience for decades to come behind bars. The 2014 case in which Lun Hoang Vu brutally killed his girlfriend Ngoc Bao-Pham in Houston left deep shockwaves on both sides of the Pacific. In the United States, it became a stark wake-up call about teen dating violence, an issue that is often overlooked. For the Vietnamese community, this tragedy also sounded an alarm about the hidden risks in the lives of international students abroad. Living far from family and without close supervision, young people can be far more vulnerable to danger or can go astray if they are not equipped with the skills to respond to threatening situations. Although the case is ended, a few troubling questions still linger. Why could Lun Huangvu, a young man described as intelligent, so coldly take the life of someone he once loved simply because she broke up with him? Were there warning signs in Vu's behavior that family and friends failed to recognize in time? If only Vi had been more cautious and had told adults about her fears when ending the relationship with Vu, perhaps she would not have had to face him alone. This became a painful lesson for young people. Always stay alert and speak with family members or school staff if you ever feel threatened or harassed in any relationship. Media outlets in both Vietnam and the United States condemned Lun Huangvu's brutality while expressing deep sympathy for the young girl's tragically short life. Across social media, Y's story was widely shared as a costly lesson about choosing relationships and about how to respond when you feel threatened. Chavis High School later held a solemn memorial for Vi, along with educational efforts to raise awareness about school violence and abuse in romantic relationships. And what do you think about the 50-year sentence given to the perpetrator in this case? Is it enough for someone as dangerous as Vu to truly reflect on what he has done? Leave your thoughts in the comments below so we can discuss. On the morning of September 27, 2024, a team of social workers and employees from the Washington State Department of Transportation, WSDOT, carried out a cleanup and clearance of a homeless encampment in the woods near Dr. Jose Rizal Park in Seattle. The camp was ordered to be cleared after a shooting occurred nearby a few days earlier, prompting authorities to aggressively clean out the area to ensure public safety. When they entered a makeshift wooden shelter that had been left behind in the forest, a social worker suddenly caught a strong, rotten stench coming from inside. At first, he assumed it was the smell of human waste from improper sanitation, but as he followed the odor, he discovered a large suitcase under the shelter's makeshift bed, sealed tightly with tape and wrapped in plastic. A sense of dread rose in him. He pulled the suitcase out and used a knife to slice through the plastic. Immediately, he froze in shock when he saw a clump of human hair sticking out, and then the curled up body of a woman came into view. She was tightly wrapped in a sleeping bag, and multiple layers of plastic bags stuffed deep inside the suitcase. Police were called right away. The scene was quickly cordoned off in the quiet forest, centered on the tragic suitcase and the haunting stench of death that lingered around it. The surroundings were chaotic, littered with garbage, syringes, and abandoned belongings, like a filthy dumping ground. In the midst of that mess, the suitcase holding a body looked like a portable grave left behind with no one the wiser. By then, the body was severely decomposed, making immediate identification extremely difficult. The victim's face was distorted, and the body showed signs of multiple broken bones, raising suspicions of an unnatural death. Police also found no identification documents or clear identifying clues at the scene. They understood one thing: a serious crime was unfolding, and the race against time to uncover the truth had only just begun. Immediately, officers began collecting evidence. The shelter where the body was found was actually a crude wooden structure someone had built themselves. Inside, a makeshift bed made of wooden planks was raised on a hollow wooden platform. That empty space beneath the bed was used to hide the suitcase. Notably, on the ground nearby, authorities found several envelopes and papers bearing the name of an Asian man, Stephen Than Nguyen. Finding personal mail at the shelter strongly suggested the shelter's occupant might be connected in some way to the horrific crime inside the suitcase. Police therefore carefully collected fingerprints and DNA samples from the suitcase and surrounding items. The victim's body was then transported to the King County Medical Examiner's office for an autopsy. From the initial findings, investigators noted multiple deep injuries to the victim's skull, apparently caused by a sharp object. The victim's arm and rib bones were fractured, possibly from blunt force, or possibly from the effort of forcing the body into a suitcase with limited space. But whichever explanation proved true, the early signs all pointed toward a brutally violent killing. The most important lead emerged when police questioned unhoused people living near the area. Several witnesses said the shelter had long belonged to a middle-aged Vietnamese man named Steven, who often traded illegal drugs in exchange for supplies with others in the camp. They also said Steven regularly carried a small axe or a machete when moving around. In particular, one witness remembered that about a month earlier, when he entered Steven's shelter to trade items, he noticed a strange, foul odor coming from the area of Steven's bed. At the time, Stephen brushed it off, claiming the smell came from his makeshift toilet, a bucket he kept nearby for relieving himself. The witness suspected something was wrong but had no basis to contact police. Now, looking back, he shuddered as he realized that unpleasant smell could have been the odor of a decomposing body. These statements further strengthened suspicions that Stephen Than Nguyen, the shelter's occupant, was directly connected to the horrific killing of the woman hidden inside the suitcase. Meanwhile, another investigative team focused on confirming the victim's identity. Fortunately, despite the advanced decomposition, some of the victim's fingertips still had enough tissue to obtain fingerprints. Forensic technicians compared those prints against national databases to see whether they matched any missing person records. Just a few days later, the results delivered a major breakthrough. The lab confirmed the victim's identity as Shannon Marie Caslin Reeder, 37 years old, matching a missing person report filed in late 2023. According to records, Shannon Reeder had been reported missing since November 2023, meaning that by the time her body was found, nearly a year had passed with no one knowing where she was. So who was Shannon Reeder? What was her life like before she died in this filthy homeless encampment? Investigators identified her as Shannon Marie Caslin Reeder, 37 years old, a white American woman born and raised in the Seattle suburbs. Shannon's childhood was not peaceful, her father left early, and her mother raised her alone under difficult financial conditions. When Shannon turned 15, tragedy struck again. Her mother died suddenly in a car accident on Shannon's birthday. The loss was so overwhelming that Shannon fell into a severe psychological crisis. She moved in with her grandmother and later with an uncle after her grandmother also passed away. During those hard years, Shannon had a close friend named Caitlin Andrews. The two were like real sisters, carefree and innocent together. Caitlin described Shannon as genuine and easily delighted. Even a new lip gloss or a beautiful pair of shoes could make Shannon happy all day. Other friends described Shannon as likable, always making people laugh with her sweet, slightly naive charm. As she entered adulthood, Shannon tried to build a life of her own. According to Caitlin, Shannon had a child and was busy with her small family. She also lived apart from her extended family and was believed to be facing many struggles. However, Shannon no longer shared everything the way she used to. Most friends stayed in touch mainly through social media, so they did not know many details. Regarding her disappearance in 2023, police contacted relatives to verify more information. The family confirmed Shannon had gone completely silent since the end of the previous year. One of Shannon's aunts said they had worried and searched multiple times, but because Shannon had always lived independently, no one initially knew where she was. Her best friend, Caitlin Andrews, also said she sensed something was wrong when Shannon did not respond to birthday messages a few months earlier. Caitlin and others tried calling and messaging Shannon on Facebook, but received no response at all. Now the worst news had arrived. Shannon's body was found inside a suitcase. Caitlin said, in shock, that it was Shannon's aunt who called to tell her this horrifying truth. Notably, authorities said Shannon had previously had stable housing, she had a house or her own apartment elsewhere, and did not regularly live at the homeless encampment where her body was discovered. That was why Shannon's appearance at the camp near Jose Rizal Park stunned her family and friends. Caitlin Andrews admitted she could not understand why Shannon was in that area, because Shannon was not homeless, and her friends had no idea she had ever been going to that encampment. So, from an unidentified body, through piecing together information and forensic work, the victim's identity was finally clarified. But that only opened up a new series of mysteries. Shannon disappeared shortly after Halloween in 2023 and was not found until nearly a year later, under especially horrific circumstances. During that missing period, what did Shannon go through? What connection did she have to the man named Stephen Than Nguyen, the occupant of the shelter where her body was discovered? And what motive led to her tragic death? These urgent questions drove investigators to follow every trace and bring the truth into the light. At this point, traffic cameras on Interstate I-90 near the area captured footage of a woman whose clothing matched Shannon's description near the encampment in the summer of 2024, walking with a man. This may have been the last time Shannon was seen alive. The footage strengthened the theory that Shannon was with Stephen around July 2024. With Stephen Than Nguyen, 57 years old, identified as the key suspect, police began tracking him down. They discovered Stephen already had an outstanding warrant from the Department of Corrections for violating probation conditions in an earlier case. Using that fact, police decided to arrest Stephen first on the warrant to avoid tipping him off and prompting him to flee. On October 3rd, 2024, the arrest team located Stephen wandering in Seattle's Chinatown International District, just a few miles from the former encampment. He was taken into custody without resistance. At the time of arrest, Stephen appeared calm and somewhat surprised, seemingly unaware that Shannon's body had been found. At the police station, investigators immediately questioned Stephen Than Nguyen about Shannon Reeder's death. At first, Stephen denied everything. He dodged questions, denied owning the suitcase, and pretended he knew nothing about the body. But, faced with concrete evidence, the body found inside his shelter, mail bearing his name at the scene, and witness statements that he often carried an axe, Stephen gradually changed his tone and admitted part of the truth. He confessed that he knew Shannon Reeder, and that the two had once been in an intimate relationship. He said Shannon came to his shelter one day in July 2024, and that the two used fentanyl together, an extremely potent synthetic illicit drug. Tragically, Shannon overdosed and suddenly lost consciousness, leaving him terrified and unsure what to do. Fearing he would be implicated because of the drugs and his prior record, he chose not to call for emergency help. Instead, Stephen claimed he placed Shannon's body into a sleeping bag, wrapped it in multiple layers of plastic, and stuffed it into the suitcase. He then hid the suitcase under the bed to keep it out of sight. When asked about the odor, Stephen said he smelled it too, but assumed it was from his makeshift toilet, so he did not pay attention. That explanation was viewed as implausible, an excuse to conceal a crime. And when questioned about the severe injuries on Shannon's body, Stephen gave an even more unusual account. He claimed that the day before she died, Shannon had tripped, hit her head on a rock, and dislocated her arm. So, he argued, the bruises and fractures on her body were the result of that fall, not violence. This statement was further seen as an attempt to evade criminal responsibility, arguing that Shannon died from an accident combined with a drug overdose, and that Stephen had nothing to do with it. However, the physical evidence did not support that claim. On October 8, 2024, an autopsy report released by Dr. Nicole Yared of the King County Medical Examiner's Office concluded that Shannon Reeder's cause of death was multiple traumatic injuries caused by a sharp object and heavy blunt force impact, and the manner of death was ruled a homicide. Specifically, the doctor described multiple deep wounds to the victim's head, along with numerous fractures, such as broken ribs and a broken arm, injuries that were entirely inconsistent with an ordinary fall. The size and nature of the wounds suggested they were more consistent with an axe blade or cleaver than with impact against a rock. More importantly, the injuries were inflicted while the victim was still alive. Alongside the autopsy findings, police also used additional investigative techniques to strengthen the case file. Data from Shannon Reeder's cell phone showed the device last pinged near Jose Rizal Park in July 2024 and then went completely offline. This information matched Stephen's statement about when Shannon came to his shelter. The last message Shannon sent, one day before she vanished, was entirely normal, which only highlighted how abnormal it was for her to suddenly disappear without any further contact. In this way, the scientific evidence completely contradicted Stephen's claim that Shannon fell and died from drug shock or overdose. In light of the forensic conclusion, on October 9, 2024, investigators returned to confront Stephen Than Nguyen. As soon as he was informed that Shannon's death had been ruled a homicide involving a sharp object, Stephen immediately fell silent and requested an attorney, ending the interview. Investigators viewed this sudden change in demeanor as a clear indicator. Once he could no longer hide behind false statements, Stephen chose silence. From that point on, prosecutors believed there was sufficient basis to charge Stephen Than Nguyen with the killing of Shannon Reeder. On October 16, 2024, after collecting the necessary evidence, the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office swiftly approved a murder charge against Stephen. This charge reflected an intentional killing without premeditation, considered consistent with the circumstances because there was no evidence Stephen had planned it in advance. On October 17, 2024, news that Stephen Than Nguyen had been formally charged was released to the media, shocking Seattle. Few could imagine that an Asian immigrant would be tied to something so horrific. But more importantly, after more than 2 weeks racing against time, investigators had finally uncovered the truth, from an unclaimed suitcase abandoned in the woods to identifying the perpetrator among countless faces hidden within the unhoused community. According to police information, Stephen Than Nguyen was born around 1967 to 1968. Information suggests Stephen may have been born or raised in a Vietnamese-American family in the United States, reflected in the fact that he had the American first name Stephen paired with a Vietnamese-style middle and last name. As for family, there is currently no data indicating that Stephen had a wife, children, or any close relatives. He appeared to have lived alone for many years. Stephen mainly stayed in homeless encampments in Seattle and had a certain level of connection within the local unhoused community. Authorities had offered him housing support through the Co-Lead program, a program for unhoused people with criminal histories, but he refused. Stephen claimed the program had too many rules, such as mandatory check-ins, no smoking indoors, or restrictions on going out at night. This suggested he preferred a free, unstructured lifestyle, despite the danger and instability that came with it. In terms of employment, Stephen had no steady job. He reportedly survived mainly through illegal activities within the encampment, specifically buying, selling, and trading illicit drugs such as fentanyl for money or goods. People in the camp said Stephen often acted as a connector, supplying drugs to other users in exchange for supplies or food. As a result, even as an unhoused person, he managed to build a relatively sturdy wooden shelter, complete with a raised bed platform and a makeshift toilet area, considered more set up than many others in the camp. Stephen had even bragged that he built the shelter himself about a year earlier, using his own axe to chop wood and put the structure together. As for his criminal background, Stephen Than Nguyen had an extensive history of run-ins with the law. He had committed multiple offenses in Washington state and several other states, including violent acts and fraud. His record included serious felonies such as unlawful imprisonment, document forgery, assault, and fraud-related crimes. Most seriously, in 2022, he was convicted of second-degree assault in Seattle. In that case, he allegedly lured a woman into his car, drove her to Seward Park, and then demanded that she perform a sexual act. When she refused, Stephen assaulted her, pressed a handgun to her head, and pulled the trigger. Fortunately, the gun was not loaded, so the victim narrowly escaped and ran. However, Stephen still chased her and forced her back into the car before police could arrive. For that conduct, he was convicted, but he appeared to have received leniency, possibly a suspended sentence or supervision, so by 2024, he was still freely out in society. Legal records also showed that Stephen had more than 20 warrants for violations and failures to appear in court, reflecting a pattern of repeatedly evading the law and disregarding court orders. In addition, Stephen had a criminal record in states outside Washington, indicating he had moved around and continued offending wherever he went. With a long history of serious convictions, especially weapon-related attacks against women, Stephen Than Nguyen was assessed as an exceptionally dangerous individual. He lived on the margins of society, used illicit drugs, routinely carried weapons such as an axe or knife, and was willing to use violence to get what he wanted. Investigators believed Stephen likely had serious issues controlling anger and violent impulses. His refusal to accept structured housing options in favor of an unrestrained, chaotic lifestyle only created more space for his aggressive behavior to continue. Regarding his relationship with the victim, Stephen claimed he met Shannon Reeder through her visits to the homeless encampment. Although she had housing, Shannon still showed up in the area from time to time, most likely to buy or use illicit drugs, and that was where she met Stephen. Over time, the two developed a brief romantic relationship, possibly no more than a temporary sexual relationship shaped by addiction. Some witnesses said they had seen Shannon with Stephen several times, and the two appeared quite close. There were no signs that Shannon had been forced into contact with Stephen. It was likely she approached him voluntarily for personal reasons, possibly emotional attachment or needs related to drugs. However, the imbalance between them was stark. Shannon was younger, a woman with stable housing, while Stephen was older, unhoused, and burdened with a long criminal record. The nature of this relationship therefore carried significant risk and danger. Stephen never confessed to a motive for the killing. Still, based on the case file and circumstances, authorities believed it was most likely the result of a sudden conflict while both were using drugs. Another hypothesis was that Stephen demanded sex and was rejected, similar to the conduct alleged in his 2022 assault case. It also could not be ruled out that they had a dispute over money or drugs. Whatever the specific motive, the methodical wrapping and concealment of the body showed Stephen clearly understood he had committed a crime and deliberately tried to hide the consequences. This confirmed that Shannon's death was not an accident nor an act of lawful self-defense. In short, the portrait of the perpetrator that emerged was a rough, repeat offender living outside the law with a pattern of exploiting women's vulnerability to satisfy personal desires. Stephen Than Nguyen became a grim symbol of the violent darkness that can hide inside homeless encampments, where deadly risks are often ignored or minimized by society. With sufficient evidence, the Stephen Than Nguyen case was transferred for prosecution in King County Superior Court in Washington State. On October 30th, 2024, Stephen appeared in court for the first time to hear the charges read. At that hearing, he remained sullen, only confirming his identity and acknowledging his procedural rights. A court-appointed defense attorney did not enter a plea at that time, and Stephen chose to remain silent in response to all accusations. The Superior Court decided to keep the bail amount at $2 million USD, the figure that had been set immediately after Stephen was arrested. With such an enormous amount, Stephen obviously had no ability to post bail. As a result, he remained in custody at the King County Jail while awaiting the next court hearings. The trial is expected to take place in 2026, according to the King County court schedule, meaning justice for Shannon Reeder is drawing closer. There is currently no information on whether Stephen has changed his statements or reached a plea deal for a reduced sentence. But given his evasive denials from the beginning, he will most likely continue to reject all guilt in court. If so, a dramatic contested trial will unfold, where a jury must decide the final truth. The case of Stephen Than Nguyen killing Shannon Reeder sent shockwaves through Seattle and drew widespread attention across the United States. First of all, it exposed the dangerous dark side of the city's homeless encampments. Expert Mark Powell, a former police officer, commented that Shannon Reeder's case showed that if homeless encampments are not controlled, they can become temporary graveyards for horrific crimes. In places that are almost lawless, rules do not exist. People can do whatever they want, including killing someone and disposing of the body right there. The reality is that no one can bury a body in their own backyard without being discovered. Yet in a neglected encampment filled with trash, that horror happened. That is why this case raised a painful question about the government's responsibility in managing these temporary neighborhoods. After the incident, Seattle was urged to increase the frequency of cleanups and oversight of homeless encampments, and not allow them to remain for so long that they become places where criminals can operate freely. At the same time, the case also raised serious questions about gaps in the justice system. Stephen Than Nguyen had an extensive criminal record and had nearly killed someone in 2022, yet he was still free in the community. He was even able to refuse a re-entry support program without facing any compulsory measures. And the fact that Stephen had 20 warrants for failing to appear in court highlighted clear weaknesses in supervising people on suspended sentences or under community supervision. If the system had operated more strictly, Stephen might have been jailed by 2024, and Shannon Reeder might not have faced the danger that led to this tragic murder. This is clearly a costly lesson for lawmakers and law enforcement. They need to monitor individuals with histories of violence more closely, especially when those individuals refuse help aimed at stabilizing and improving their lives, because that is where the seeds of crime can grow. And you? How do you think Stephen Than Nguyen should pay the price under the law for what he did to Shannon Reeder? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've stayed with us to this point, don't hesitate to hit like, share the video, and subscribe to continue this journey with us, because many more compelling case files are still waiting to be uncovered. We'll pause today's video here. Goodbye, and see you again at this time tomorrow